Hello my dear friends and family, I'm Operator Starsky, and today we are going to talk about something that has been whispered, discussed, predicted and denied all at the same time: the possible Russian mobilization in spring 2026. Because there are some very interesting signs that something is actually cooking in the terrorist federation. Generally speaking, the situation inside Russia nowadays is not exactly what you would call stable or confident, because, as you know, the Russian economy is shaking like a washing machine with a brick in it, and the prices are jumping higher than Russian commanders from windows. Now, the experts are saying that by spring 2026, Russia may try to mobilize yet another wave of human material, I mean Russian citizens, because apparently the current supply of cannon fodder in Russia is running low. And we will also talk about how these potential hundreds of thousands or even millions of newly conscripted Russian unfortunates may change the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine. And the tiny spoiler here: if you don't have armored vehicles and artillery shells, sending more bodies into the meat grinder is not really a strategy. It's just, well, a good Russian tradition at this point. And if you're thinking that sounds insane, yes, my friends, welcome to the Russian military genius in the 21st century. And at the same time, Russian industry is running out of stored vehicles. The good old BMPs and tanks from the 1970s have already been dug out of storage, repainted, and sent straight into Ukrainian FPV drone testing program. So basically now Russians are switching to anything that has wheels or hooves. We've seen Chinese golf carts, Lada cars, bikes, horses, donkeys. And I'm waiting for the very first footage of a Russian commander leading a Russian cavalry charge. Imagine some brave Russian general standing there on the top of the hill together with his horse that is trying to eat grass. That might look very, very interesting. So, my dear friends, please get comfortable, grab some tea or coffee, and let's break this down step by step. What's happening inside Russia, what experts believe will happen next, and how all of this affects the battlefield in Ukraine. Because as usual, Russia keeps making new problems and Ukraine keeps giving them new surprises. So let's talk about the signs that another Russian mobilization wave might actually be coming. And to understand what's ahead, we need to remember what happened back in 2022. Because I think all of us remember how Putin, with his calm old mushroom face, told everyone no mobilization is planned, everything is under control. And literally 2 weeks later, half of Russia was running towards the borders like it was Black Friday at IKEA. And suddenly Russia did not plan mobilization so much that they mobilized around 300,000 people in just a couple of weeks. Now, fast forward to today and we see very, very similar signs again. And actually even more interesting ones. For example, we all know that Kremlin is recruiting people from abroad and not just from places like occupied territories of Ukraine or migrant workers from inside Russia. No, they're literally going shopping for soldiers, for example, in Africa, in countries where people already struggle, where life is not easy. And then some Russian recruiter comes in wearing British MTP or American multicam because Russian camo is just so bad, and says, come join the strongest army of the world. We give you Russian passports. And the sad part is that some people accept this because poverty unfortunately doesn't leave many choices. But on the other hand, Russian citizenship as a reward, that is literally like offering a free ticket on the Titanic after it already hit the iceberg. Congratulations, you are now officially part of collapsing empire. Please enjoy shortages, censorship, corruption, and a one-way trip to the nearest Ukrainian minefield. To a normal person, the whole Russian citizenship thing is so cringy that even the Russian propaganda cannot make it look inspiring, and that says a lot. Now, how realistic is Russian mobilization in 2026? The experts say that Kremlin is preparing the legal and bureaucratic systems for another mass call-up in the country. The Russians are digitizing military records, they're updating draft databases and building new training camps. And not because they love being ready, but literally because they need bodies. The fact is their professional soldiers are mostly gone. The Russian prison battalions also depleting very fast. Many of their so-called volunteers realized that volunteering to die is actually not as fun as TV promised. So the last resource left is the regular Russian male population. And that supply sadly is very, very large. Potentially Putin could mobilize between 1 and 2 million people if he forces it. It would be painful, it will be unpopular, maybe even explosive for the Russian society, but technically possible. Especially if Putin doesn't just do it once, but spreads it over months, going region by region. And Russia, as we know, has a long tradition of supplying the Russian army with free bodies. The thing is, even if Russians mobilize 1 million new men, we are not talking about trained soldiers. We're talking about people who probably touched a rifle for the last time when they were around 19 in some forest training camp, when they were learning how to march and paint walls in the Russian general's country house. The mobilized Russian men are not elite forces, these are bodies, and Russian command treats bodies as ammunition, which is why they don't care how many of them survive the first week. So yeah, in my personal opinion, the Russian mobilization is not just possible, it's actually very much likely. The Russian economy today is already reorganized around the war, and the Russian propaganda is working full power. But as we are going to see in just a second, simply having more soldiers doesn't automatically mean having more strength. Let's take a closer look at what these potential millions of Russian mobilized men are actually supposed to fight with. Because, you know, when you send troops into battle, usually you want to provide them with something that at least vaguely resembles equipment. But in Russia's case, this part is getting, how do we say, creative. We've already seen the results of Russia emptying its old Soviet storages when all that ancient Soviet treasure has been dug up and sent to Ukraine. We're talking tanks from the 1970s, the most advanced ones, BMPs from 1960s, and basically other armored vehicles that last saw maintenance when Leonid Brezhnev still had eyebrows and French kissed other men. According to analysts who monitor satellite images, Russian storages are close to being empty of working armored vehicles. They can still find some rusted relics covered in moss, but to turn them into tanks again, they need a miracle, also a factory, and probably a time machine. So naturally, the Russian command is looking for alternatives, and we all know what happens when Russian generals use this word. It means that we are about to witness something spectacularly stupid. There's already tons of videos of Russian invaders using Chinese-made golf carts, cheap motorbikes, animals, literally all sorts of cringy stuff. The fact is, if they mobilize millions more men, we might actually see cavalry returning to the battlefield, simply because Terror Russia is running out of fuel and horses are cheaper than diesel. Imagine being a Russian conscript in 2026. You get drafted, handed a 100-year-old rifle, put onto a donkey and told to go to liberate Kiev. I bet that at this point even the donkey is questioning life choices. And yet, despite having no equipment, Russia keeps attacking Ukrainian positions, hoping to win this war. But because they have no armor to support their infantry, their tactic has turned into what the military analysts now call small assault groups, or what we in Ukraine call the meat waves. Basically, the Russians send little groups of 5, 10, 20 people towards Ukrainian positions without proper support, without air cover, without any coordination, literally just go there and die. And if you die, we will send another group. And the main goal of that is not to win. The goal is to eventually exhaust the defenders by sheer repetition. It's literally like trying to break down a door, not by knocking it, but by repeatedly running face first into it until the hinges get tired. But there's a tiny problem for the Russians. Ukrainian drones can see literally everything. We're talking FPVs, reconnaissance drones, night vision drones, all that. The Russians cannot get closer than 300 or 400 meters to the Ukrainian positions without literally being eliminated. And the Russians keep repeating that day after day. And of course, the only thing they get is basically losing more and more Russian men. For kilometers of land measured in meters or sometimes just Russian body piles. And that is basically the reason why the Russian advances in 2025 have been so slow, and why they failed near Sumy, why they keep grinding day after day without getting real breakthroughs. Of course, if you're Putin, you can easily throw 100,000 men into an attack, but if they have no armored transport, no artillery cover, and no protection from Ukrainian drones, they are not an army. They are what we in the military call a target. What happens if Russia actually mobilizes several more million people and send them to Ukraine? Will that dramatically change the situation on the battlefield? Well, yes and no, but mostly no. The modern warfare is not a contest of how many bodies you can throw into the meat grinder. That stopped working somewhere around the First World War. Today, the key factors are technology, logistics, training, coordination, and of course survivability. And the fact is, Russia is struggling with all of those. First of all, drones. Right now, Ukrainian drone reconnaissance is everywhere. It's like in every trench, every tree line, and every field. You cannot move a group of soldiers several hundred meters without being spotted. And once you are spotted, it literally doesn't matter if you brought 5 people or 500. You get hit before you get close. Second thing is fortifications, because Ukraine has spent years building layered defensive lines. Changing the front line now is not about speed, my friends. It's about slow and painful grinding. And grinding without equipment means your soldiers are literally just walking targets. Now let's talk about the third thing, the training, because generally, yes, Russia can mobilize several more million men, but training them properly takes a lot of time. It takes months. And while you can actually train a dude how to shoot a rifle in just under 2 weeks, it's just not enough, my friends, because combat worthiness is not about heroically dying for Putin. It's about surviving and staying in the fight. But looking at Russians, we can see that they're doing absolutely opposite thing. They prepare disposable soldiers for meat assaults, the troops that actually are not supposed to return home, that barely know how to hold a rifle, and in best case, they are also trained how to load and unload donkeys, let alone conducting coordinated assaults under fire. Fourth is equipment. Even if Russia gets millions of bodies, they don't have the vehicles to move those bodies. They have no armored transport, they have no tanks, no functioning artillery support, because most of that has already either exploded or is currently rusting very artfully somewhere in Zaporizhia. Think about it. To be able to move 1 million soldiers, you obviously need thousands of armored vehicles. But Russia is currently down to golf carts, donkeys, and whatever the Chinese Alibaba catalog offers. So in reality, if Russia launches a new mobilization, what we will see is simply more of the same. We're talking more small infantry waves, more daily Russian losses, and more grinding without strategic breakthroughs. The only difference I can think about is even more families inside Russia potentially asking uncomfortable questions. And uncomfortable questions in a dictatorship are dangerous not only for people asking them, but for the dictator who eventually has to answer. And that brings us to the conclusion. So, my dear friends and family, the Kremlin may mobilize again, and all the signs are there. We're talking digital draft systems, propaganda warming up, Russian recruiters traveling around the world like low-quality salesmen, because the front line in Ukraine is not shifting dramatically. But even if the internationally wanted war criminal Putin manages to mobilize 1 or 2 million new troops, he still needs something to transport them in. And unless Kremlin starts producing tanks from IKEA manuals, we are going to witness the first horse-mounted infantry charge of the 21st century. Truly the innovation the world was waiting for. Russia will continue throwing people into meat assaults, and Ukraine will continue stopping them with expanding Ukrainian drone technologies. And the only real result will be a spectacular harvest of properly fertilized Ukrainian sunflower. So, my dear friends and family, stay informed, stay prepared, and as always, support Ukraine however you can. I'm Operator Starsky. Thank you for being here. Thank you for standing with us. And as always, be safe.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.